As always, I'm joined by Kasim here. And with a guest today, Sama, how are you?
I'm very good, how are you?
Yeah, I'm excellent. Obviously, we've seen the work you've been doing with the Econ Society. You're now the head of Reading School Econ Society as well. What's that kind of been like, getting into that role?
I think it's been incredible. It's great to see that so many people have a passion for economics. And so we're fully booked till February right now with people who want to present. So yeah, I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've done an amazing job so far, so we just wish you the best of luck coming into next year as well.
Thank you.
So now we're going to begin the episode with the first topic we have, which is previewing the upcoming autumn budget, led by Rachel Reeves. So next week it's set to be released, and the government is going to release their plans on taxation and spending for the next parliamentary year. They have a, I think, £20 billion gap to fix, or financial gap to make up in this budget, so it's quite a significant one.
Yeah.
So Mark, what's the latest news?
So I think before we talk about that, let's just rewind a bit. So the OBR, which is the Office for Budget Responsibility, initially said that there was going to be a £30 billion fiscal hole due to the UK's productivity being 0.1% less than what they'd expected. And recently, it's gone down to £20 billion. And so Rachel Reeves' plans have changed a lot of that. Initially, in the Labour manifesto, they said they were definitely not going to increase income tax. And then, due to the £30 billion hole, she said she was considering it, and now she's gone back to saying she definitely won't.
Yeah, I think it is important that the Labour Party does not increase their income tax. Obviously, right now, the party's under a bit of fire for different actions that have been committed recently. And, with the rise of the Reform Party and the Green Party, the future of the Labour Party in power in the UK doesn't seem all that certain. So if Rachel Reeves did decide to increase income tax, it would be seen as going against the manifesto, which is the reason why many people voted them in the first place.
Yeah.
So they must find alternative ways of doing this. One suggested way of increasing taxation, which I thought was quite interesting, was a tax on electric vehicles. So at the moment, they're not taxed, or they're hardly taxed at the moment, compared to petrol vehicles, diesel vehicles. So what are your opinions on that? Do you think that could happen?
Well, I think it is a fairly smart move from the government in the sense that the proportion of people that are now using electrical cars has increased by a lot. But I think it's important to understand that this is kind of in some senses saying that they are going to reduce the amount of people who decide to purchase an electric vehicle now. And obviously that's not going to sit well with the Green Party and a lot of the youth who, in some senses, the Labour is favoured by the youth, and doing this is not going to help them that much. But at the same time, I do see where they're coming from.
Yeah, I think this is a move more for the long term, where we might see a vast increase of electrical cars. Obviously, with fuel duty on petrol cars, there is still a lot of petrol cars in the UK, but as we know, in the future, that number splits down heavily. And there's also some other taxes. So we have the fiscal drag, which I think was one of the main ways they would increase tax revenue, which is where they freeze the income tax thresholds, but they don't actually increase the rate of income tax. So most people will be automatically moved up to the higher thresholds. And I think that's quite a smart play. You're right, they haven't really done anything different to them. So,
yeah, I think this is going to be a very important moment for the Labour Party as well. So as I mentioned earlier, they are under fire right now, and their position going into the next election is far from secure. I mean, at the moment, Reform lead the polls by a substantial amount, and I think the Green Party just recently overtaken them or are catching up significantly. Obviously, we talked about Zach Belansky earlier and his policies, and how that in some ways that may inspire some people to go and I think voting for the Green Party this time out is the right move. So yeah, it is for the Labour Party. This will be important, and if they anger consumers or they anger the average person in the UK with this it would not sit well at all. So it comes down to the way they get their budget across and the way it's received by the people.
Yeah, just to add to that quickly, the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, she said that if the government, or if the Labour government doesn't address their, I think, welfare spending, and if they don't cut that, the UK is facing bankruptcy. So you can see that the other parties are putting more pressure on Labour for this budget to be successful. So yeah, you're right, 100%. This is very important for Labour, and it's very important for the UK as well, who is going through a little bit of an economic slump at the moment. We haven't seen much economic growth our budget deficit is increasing over the years. So yeah, I 100% agree with you.
And I think it's really interesting because for the first time in a very long time, it's not just going to be between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. I think for the first time we are genuinely seeing that someone like the Lib Dems or the Green Party or any of the other parties really do have a chance. And I think on one hand it's a great place for opportunity to come, but on the other hand it's really scary because in some senses you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, I think the last time extremist parties were able to come to power in Europe was in that pre-World War II period. So in some ways people are very fearful of that. They're fearful that by letting parties such as, Italy right now, there's a heavily right-wing leadership. If Reform comes to power, that's another very extreme far-right party. They're worried that these parties coming to power may reduce the stability of Europe and may potentially lead to conflict in the future. But that's why I think the budget now is so important.
100%, I agree. If we go back to the budget for a little bit, let's talk about some more taxes that they introduced. So salary sacrifice is another one that they intend to increase, which is where they, I think so it's after income tax, it's before income tax, where they will put a cap on the amount of money you can put directly into your pension, right? That's what it is. So in essence, people before could just put loads of money before income tax into the pension, and that money wouldn't be taxed, and therefore that's better for them. But I think Labour realised this, and this is happening more, so they have put tax on that, which I think is quite smart as well. And there's also, I think there's another tax about cycling, I think, cycle to work scheme or something.
Yeah, indeed. So originally what you could do is, if you wanted to cycle to work, you could buy a cycle through your employer, and this would allow you to save money. But recently, Labour might be deciding to get rid of this. It's important to remember that these are all just speculations. The budget is coming out in 1 week, but they could be deciding to remove that bicycle scheme, which I think, in the grand scheme of things, isn't a massive thing. But it's important to remember that for so many people, we have to remember the average salary of someone in the UK is around £36,000. Not everyone can afford a car. So if you're working somewhere and you need transportation, removing this could be really harmful for you.
100%, I agree. And that's basically all of the taxes we have, but there's also loads of changes to government spending, which is the second part of the budget. So the government planned to increase spending on NHS, which is something that is very Labour-esque. Labour were the ones who created the NHS, and they increased not just health spending, but education spending as well. So they're prioritising things that would increase, things that are kind of, the reputation in the UK for education and health has been going down recently due to, for example, long A&E queues and university graduation rates of people who get jobs. That is also falling as well. So these are two sectors where the UK needs to address their spending, and that's why they're doing it. That's why they're increasing spending in both those places.
I guess to take an economist standpoint for this, I think, first of all, it is quite rare to see a government putting a lot of money into education, normally because it's really hard to see the effect of that spending in a few years. It kind of takes at least 5 to 10 years, and oftentimes the other party can just claim that they did that. So I think it is, we should understand that Rachel Reeves is doing quite a good thing here, and obviously spending on education is going to lead to long-run economic growth, which is obviously a great thing. But even though that will lead to long-run economic growth, it won't lead to short-run economic growth, which is what we're expecting, which is what we need.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think if you look at countries that do well on certain metrics such as inequality or economic growth, you can kind of take Norway as an example maybe. So Norway at the moment, the leadership there, they adopt a kind of democratic socialist style of going around things.
As discussed last week.
As discussed last week, where they invest a large amount of taxpayers' money into healthcare, into education. So you get such a strong welfare scheme that even the bottom 15% of all residents of Norway, their standard of living is substantially higher than that of the bottom 15% in the UK, for example.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something that Rachel Reeves is trying to do here by increasing spending. But obviously there's a risk of overspending, which would not be good for the government.
Absolutely. And I think as great as the welfare scheme is, I think this is what someone like Nigel Farage is saying, is that a lot of illegal immigrants are coming and taking advantage of these. So it's a really fine balance between how can we improve the welfare system as well as making sure that we are limiting it so that only the people who really deserve this are benefiting, whilst also, because the importance of a welfare scheme is taking care of the most vulnerable in society, and that's the main issue we need to look at.
100% agree, especially with the increase of illegal immigrants coming across. We have more people in need of a welfare scheme such as that. I just want to touch on one more thing before we end, which is another one of the government's plans for their spending, which is defence. And this is a Labour man. This is a classic Labour again. They want to increase their spending on defence. Currently, it's 2.2%, which is slightly above the threshold of 2% set by NATO, all NATO members. But they're going to increase it to 2.5% by 2027 and 5% by 2035. This is a lot of spending, but I think it also reflects the expectation of future political tensions growing in the whole world. Obviously, we have wars breaking out in the Middle East, wars of the Ukraine-Russian war, and lots of bombing and tension in loads of parts of the world, which is probably why the government has decided to do this.
Yeah, no, I think you can look at it more, you can look at it less in how it's an increase of X and Y%. You can look at it as an increase in itself. It's a statement by the Labour government. They're showing that they're going to take a stand against the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and they're trying to show that you cannot mess, you cannot mess with Britain in a way. That's the kind of message that they're trying to put across here. Whether or not Russia looks at it that way, I'm not too sure. Because obviously the United Kingdom's been for like a long period of time, it's not been one of the, you would say, global superpowers, has it? So even this increase in defence spending, it doesn't really send the message, it sends a message that they are willing to get involved if they have to, but I don't think Russia will really fear this in the way that maybe it's intended to.
I do think that's true, but I think what Carson is saying in the sense is that there's growing instability around the world. If we look at Sudan, if we look at America, if we look at Russia, there's just so many things going on, and an increasing amount of extremism that we really don't know what's going on. But I absolutely do agree with what you're saying, Drew, in the sense that I think the United Kingdom is it has been subdued recently in the sense that there's no economic growth, and the UK isn't doing as much as compared to someone like America or Ukraine in terms of the war. So I feel like this is a movement by the Labour government to try and re-establish ourselves at the very top.
100%.
Yeah, well, obviously, very important budget next week. We look forward to seeing the results of it, what actually comes out, and maybe you can even come back on and discuss.
Absolutely. Yeah, cool. Moving on to our second topic, we look at the government shutdown in America finally ending. So, it was triggered on October 1st, 2025, and it lasted 43 days, and it was the longest government shutdown in the history of the United States. And this basically means the government had no money, and they weren't able to fund or give their wages to the federal workers. So it meant that loads of people who were employed by the government didn't receive any money. And it's finally ended now. Drew, what do you have for us?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few impacts of this, most notably that many government services or federal services were affected heavily. So obviously, because there's an act that was passed in 2019 that meant that these federal workers get paid after the shutdown finishes. But the issue is that many federal workers, their incomes are not high enough to allow them to have a full month where they basically don't receive any income. So many of them take time off and do other jobs, such as they may become delivery drivers, for example, just to ensure that they have some form of income. So this meant that many federal workers didn't come into to work, basically. So this is particularly notable if you were flying to America, or so you wouldn't see, there wouldn't be as many air traffic controllers, which meant that flights were heavily disrupted. Other programs were heavily disrupted as well, such as SNAP, which is a service that provided food for low-income families in America. That did not go ahead during the government shutdown as normal. I mean, that was heavily limited. So the whole shutdown, basically the consequence of this government shutdown is it's just angered a lot of people. It's disrupted the lives of everyday Americans. So this has kind of led to a bit of anger towards Donald Trump and his administration, because some people kind of see his rigidness as the reason the shutdown even happened in the first place. So yeah, that's basically it.
And I think it's kind of scary in the sense that how is a leader in such a powerful country like the United States able to put something forward and literally I believe 1.4 million employees did not receive pay for weeks for 43 days. And I think it's just absolutely crazy that someone can have so much power and influence the entire country to affect that many people. And I think that it's important to understand that the reason why the bill was passed was not because Republicans decided to go against the bill. It's because six of the other party decided to vote for the bill. And it's important to understand that the left side is actually leaning more and understanding that they need to bend towards what Donald Trump is saying, which is terrifying.
Yeah, I think that the long-term impacts of this are quite significant as well. So obviously you can look at the short-term impacts, you have the loss of pay, obviously workers are not coming in because it's just not viable for them, but long-term as well, the estimated loss in revenue for the United States is in the billions. That is a very significant amount, because what you've basically had is over the last month just a massive fall in economic output, because many of these federal workers are not there. So it's quite significant, and yeah, it just again shows why people are really angry at Donald Trump. Obviously, in addition to this, Donald Trump still kept ICE, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He still kept them funded during the government shutdown, which in a way sends out kind of a message. It's a very anti-immigration message from Donald Trump, but the actions of ICE have been circulating heavily on social media recently, and it has drawn a lot of criticism.
Yeah, 100%, I agree. I just want to touch on the psychological aspect of the government shutdown. So, like specifically for consumers and producers, because obviously during this time there are many federal workers and a lot of people who were dependent on government aid just basically lost their main source of income, and so there was increased uncertainty about prices, and that led to consumer and business confidence going down, and that's why there was a lack of investment, which led to the lack of economic growth that we saw in this period. Do we think that now there can be an economic rebound? I'm not so sure. It's going to take time for the US economy to recover from this lack of activity. But I guess we'll wait and see.
Well, I guess it's important to understand that normally the reason why the economy rebounds after such a massive event is normally because the government decides to increase government spending. So if we take COVID, for example, if we look at the UK, we had the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. So although economic growth did drop, because of the increase in government spending, we were able to rebound. Whereas this is us returning back to normal. So there's not necessarily going to be something, because if we look at the components of aggregate demand, consumption, investment, government expenditure, and net exports, none of those are necessarily going to change. They're just going to return to normal. So this doesn't mean that there's going to be economic growth. And I believe that there was an estimation of 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points of economic growth were going to decrease just due to this. So it's important to understand that this entire shutdown had massive consequences for the US economy.
I think historically as well, there's been numerous government shutdowns, and after each one, it's always taken a large period of time for the economy to recover, and this is the longest one yet. It's the longest one yet by a significant distance. I think it's a few weeks. Usually, historically, they've lasted maybe a couple of days. This one has lasted over a month. It's been really catastrophic for the US economy, and I'm not too sure if we'll see the economy recover anytime soon.
And I also think that although this shutdown was crazy, it's also important to remind that a bill has actually been passed, and one of the things on the bill is that now it's illegal to search senators' phone records without notice, and they might be paid $500,000 for each violation. And although I understand this is an act of privacy and making sure that people's privacy is respected, senators do have an insane amount of power. If we look at insider trading, for example, it's a massive thing in the US. And so this is just another sign that we may be leaning towards something where the people in power have something that you cannot take away from them.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, and I think it's very important insight there. I also want to finally touch on the impact this can have on the Republican Party, because we are seeing recently with lots of, if we look at a general overview of US politics, there are loads of city-state, obviously Mamdani is the example touched on last week, but there are loads of city-state elections where the Democratic Party are actually coming out more victorious, or their candidate is taking over. So what do we think is the impact on the reputation of the Republican Party after this, and just generally what's going on in the US?
I think historically, in cities especially in the last few years, you normally see the Democratic Party come out on top over the Republicans. I mean, you take from that what you will. And also, I wouldn't say Trump is necessarily doing badly in terms of support right now. So if you look at the MAGA, Make America Great Again movement, it is still on the rise somewhat. It is still very prominent. It's one of the buzzwords that is used in America quite a lot now. And obviously, coming to the next election, many people do predict that J.D. Vance may come to power. That's kind of the vibe in America right now. So, yes, I think it is bad in some way for Donald Trump, but he's managed to spin the story somewhat. So he's made it seem like, oh, it's the Democrats' fault. The Democrats have failed to agree to my bill and failed to pass that through Senate, which is the reason we're in a government shutdown. Not necessarily that he didn't give any leeway to the Democrats, and he didn't give them any what they wanted. Whether or not Donald Trump should have done that or should have not done that, I don't know, to be honest.
But I do think in some senses it's because the rationale of the Republican Party supporters, they're so far gone in the sense that, for example, later we'll talk about the Epstein files, but something as crazy as that could be released and people will still support Donald Trump. So I think it's gone past the point of having a certain rationale and supporting the public. It's more about just doing whatever you want and people are going to support you anyways, which is a dangerous precedent.
Yeah, I think, well, obviously people in America are very happy the government shutdown has come to an end, and we look to see whether America can recover in the future. Okay, we're going to be moving on to the last topic of the day, which is the Trump and BBC lawsuit. A very interesting topic, let's say. Sam, what do you have for us?
So what happened is that the BBC spliced a couple of clips. I believe they were 54 minutes apart on January 6th. And essentially, they were pushing this propaganda that Trump was encouraging all of the Republican supporters to go storm and fight at the Capitol, which was not the case. So, yeah.
I mean, what the key thing here is that Trump was accused of inciting violence. Violence is the key thing here. We know that what actually happened on January 6th was that the protesters broke into the Capitol, smashing the windows and assaulting police officers, and sadly 9 people lost their lives. So it was a very, very important event in US politics for Trump, and Trump has already had a decrease in his reputation from this event, and he didn't want it to escalate further. And seeing this spliced clip, he noticed that people would think that he was clearly inciting violence. He wasn't necessarily doing this. He was just getting across the message that they wanted to walk down to the Capitol and fight. He could have been meaning morally fight. We don't know. But I think, in my opinion at least, I think he did mean to do violence, because he said fight like hell. I think hell is kind of a word that you wouldn't use unless you were inciting violence. And I think that even though, and Donald Trump, the reason for this whole Capitol thing was because he wouldn't accept the results of the 2020 election, in which he lost to Joe Biden. He called the election rigged, and countless times he said that he wouldn't accept the results of the election.
I'm going to disagree with you there. I don't necessarily think he was inciting violence from this speech. Obviously, the splash one makes it look extremely evident like he did, but that's obviously not real. If you look at what you can kind of see Trump was trying to get at here was that he wanted to see protests in some way, shape, or form. He didn't actually specify that, which was the downfall kind of, because people took that to literally mean, oh, let's go storm the Capitol. I think what he was asking for was people to not support the Biden administration and to not make life easy for the Biden administration that was going to come into power.
Okay, but can I just ask you one question? Specific quotes. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. I think this is very extreme for a president of the United States to say. This indicates that he wants extreme action.
No, I agree with you there. I think, obviously, the way you're taking it to be is like, oh, we'll fight literally, as in we'll take the streets and we'll fight.
Yes.
I think, yes, because that's the way people interpreted it. And whether that's fully Trump's fault, there's arguments for that, and there's arguments against that. I think in this case, what I'm looking at the text and looking at the speech, when I hear we'll fight, it's more like we'll fight behind the scenes, we'll try and make things right in America. Obviously, the idea that the election was rigged, which has been proven false on many occasions, that's obviously controversial. So the whole basis behind it, from Trump's point of view, probably does not make sense.
But Drew, I think it would be fair to argue that a massive point of a democratic system is a peaceful transition of power. Like if we take Andrew Cuomo, when he lost the election and his supporters were booing, he said, no, we will not do that. We will actually support Zoran Mamdani in his power. And I think that's a really important thing to see. But rather than talking about whether that was correct or false, I think we should focus on, because this is what's happening right now, the BBC. As UK taxpayers, we are paying for the BBC's fair and impartial reporting, but I think we can't really say it's fair and impartial after what's happened.
No, exactly. I mean, if you look at certain companies in America, such as Fox News, for example, it's pretty clear, no matter which position you take, that they may not be impartial, right? But in the UK, the BBC is kind of the flagship for news reporting. The whole message is based off impartial reporting. In this instance, it's extremely clear that it may not have been fully impartial. Obviously, splicing the clips, like the BBC says that they did that in order to simply condense it, but the way in which it was spliced, I think we can all agree on this, does make it seem like Trump directly incited violence. And going back to the point I said earlier, I think Trump is in the wrong, like obviously, and that's what I believe. It's just that I don't think in this instance he was directly saying, oh, let's go to the Capitol and let's go storm it. I think he was more talking about the idea that, oh, let's make life hard for the Biden administration. That's a bad message, and I agree with what he said, that that's not the right way to transfer power. Going back to this though, yes, I think it's clear that the BBC is somewhat in the wrong here.
But I do think that the reason Trump is seeking this defamation suit is not because he genuinely believes that that defamation took place, or that he believes that he's going to get a lot of money for this, which is his main reason. I think what Trump intends to do from this is, if a court can prove that the BBC was in the wrong and Trump was in the right, he has gained validation from the legal system, something which you cannot deny. You cannot say that Trump was wrong if a government. Well, you can say that Trump was wrong, but when a legal precedent has said no, defamation has taken place, Trump is automatically on the upper hand, and I think this is what he's going after.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if the court does rule this to be defamation, then that will be a massive propaganda win for Trump, especially, and I agree. If we go a little back to the BBC here, I think there's been massive consequences here. So the head of the BBC, Samir Shah, had to send an apology letter directly to the White House, which was quite mild in its response, and I think was quite submissive to Donald Trump, indicating how much power he has as the President of America. The Director General, Tim Davie, and the News Chief, Deborah Thomas, have both resigned due to this. And I think what this has caused is pressure building around the BBC for it to remain impartial, like you said, to keep up with its reputation. Obviously, there are people who don't think it's impartial, but I think the majority of people do. So they need to uphold its reputation. If they can win this court case, that will be very good as well. Because this could get very, very tough for the BBC if the money that Trump actually wants, he gets. Because $5 billion is actually greater than the income that the BBC generated last year from license fees, which was only $3.8 billion. So that puts into context how important this lawsuit is.
I think this has the potential to be a very historic case in some ways. So obviously, if Trump does win this, it sets a precedent, doesn't it? It sets a precedent that if a world leader does not agree with the views, or does not like the way they've been presented by certain media companies, they can just go out there and sue and basically cripple the company. And by suing for $5 billion, that will inevitably cripple the BBC. The BBC does not make enough money annually to make up for that. But in the opposite direction, if the BBC wins, which I kind of expect they will, to be honest.
We can talk about later.
If we will talk about later. But if the BBC wins, does it set a precedent that if news reporters are not exactly impartial, they can splice comments around and make it portray leaders in some way?
I think that's really interesting, but I think we need to understand that the reason Trump is suing for defamation is in the main sense that the whole premise of the BBC is that it's meant to be fair. If you're portraying something as fair and then pushing a certain bias or propaganda, well then it's not really fair. And I think that's where Trump's main issue is. How can you say something is fair and then it be directly against you? So I think that's a really important thing to think about as well.
Yeah, 100%. And if we look at the legal challenges of his defamation case, is this feasible? Let's just explore this a little bit. So, first of all, the document was aired last year in October, 2024 October. So it's been quite a while from now to then. Does the defamation claim still have legality due to this? That's a question. It's been quite a long, why wouldn't have Trump sue for defamation when the documentary was aired? That's one question that the judges will probably ask. And then, at the same time, it wasn't really broadcasted much in the US. It wasn't really popular in the US. The US citizens didn't have really direct access to this documentary. It was obviously BBC, it was obviously in the UK. And Trump is claiming that his reputation, which is more important and more crucial for the US citizens, was defamed. So there can be a case to be argued, is it really significant? It's just the BBC, it's halfway across the Atlantic. So that's an argument that can be made.
Yeah, I think it is quite interesting. Obviously, I think at the end of the day, I think it'll come down to, so obviously the documentary focused on the Capitol riots and whether Trump had a role in inciting them. It comes down to whether a court sees Trump as guilty in being the driving cause for those riots. And in my opinion, I think, although I can't speak for the emotions that Trump would have been going through, he may have been happy that the riots did happen. It may have been like a positive outcome for him. However, I don't believe that at any point in this speech he actually directly said that he didn't directly instruct his supporters to riot at the Capitol. The key word being riot. He may have instructed them to go there, but he didn't instruct them to riot. And in law, you have to be incredibly specific. So that's one thing that may cause an issue.
So I think the key issue that's arising is there are two parts to this. One is, what did Trump actually mean? And the second part is, what is the BBC doing? And although obviously Trump is very powerful as the President of the United States of America, but I think it goes deeper than that with the second issue, in the sense that the BBC is an organisation that's been around for quite a long time. If we can't trust something that's so institutional in the UK, such as the BBC, then it's really hard to find true sources that can inform us to make decisions, such as who we want to vote for. If we can't believe the BBC is telling the truth about something like riots, how can we believe the BBC is telling the truth about the budget? How can we believe the BBC is telling the truth about new laws? And I think that's where the key issue arises. It's this chasm of trust and understanding what is actually going on.
I do agree with that, but at the same time, I think this is maybe a bit too far-fetched to go off one case, because the BBC, as you said, has been extinct for so long, and it has been providing accurate news for that time. Obviously, this is a bad thing they've done, but let's not jump to conclusions yet. I think it could lead to what you said, but I think it's simply just a mistake from the BBC. Maybe an intended mistake, but nonetheless, I think because of the pressure at the BBC right now, they will understand that in the future they have to be more careful. So that's what I think the BBC will take from this, and that's why I think we should maybe relax ourselves a little bit with what we think about the BBC.
Yeah, they obviously did condense it slightly. They were probably trying to just get the key moments.
Yeah.
It's just that they framed it in such a bad way.
And I think it's important to remember that any reporting is biased reporting. You can never eliminate a bias. So, Qasim, although what you're saying about, in the sense that this is one case, this is a sign that there is a bias against against Republican politicians in America. And it's important to understand that although this is one case that we have directly seen this, in every single article the words will be picked in a certain way to illustrate this idea that Republican politicians in America are not someone we should follow. And I think that's a key thing. The idea of the BBC is that we should be fair, and we can never truly eliminate bias. So I agree, it is quite a hard line to perfectly level out, but it's important to just see that this is pushing the limits, and what is this going to mean?
Yeah, well, this is a big couple of weeks for Donald Trump's reputation, with the BBC scandal, which we mentioned earlier, and the release of the Epstein files. So well, I guess we need to wait and see. But Samar, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Yeah, we were very great. And we'll see all you guys next episode.